This week on Forward.
Inequality is much more than an economic inconvenience for the people who aren't well treated. It shreds the reciprocity norms that make social cohesion and democracy possible. And that's why our politics is so screwed up today, is that they have been exploited in a really pretty terrible way for the last 30 or 40 years. And many of them have lost faith in democracy and government for reasonable reasons.
If you think you've been screwed,
you're
probably right.
You are correct. And if you're angry at government for letting that happen, you have an absolute right to feel that way.
It is my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast the people's billionaire, man behind the $15 minimum wage, and lots of people, lots of parts of the country, and co-author of the new book, Corporate Bullshit: Exposing the Lies and Half-Truths That Protect Profit, Power, and Wealth in America. If anyone would know, it's Nick Hanauer. Welcome back, Nick.
Thank you, Andrew, for that kind and embarrassing introduction. Appreciate it. How are you,
Dude,
buddy?
you deserve the mantle. I still vividly remember reading the article, like the pitchforks are coming for us, and being like, wow, this guy is really with it. He really gets it. You've also been quoted as saying, look, how many pairs of pants can I buy? like saying that I'm a billionaire, I'm going to somehow like create all these jobs. It's like, well, that's not quite how it works. It's not not like I'm going to corner the market in trousers and create all these jobs. So congrats on the amazing progress you made. Let's talk a little bit about the fight for 15, because I think that's many ways a super relevant story for the book, and will help people get to know what drives you. Yeah,
for sure. When we cooked up the idea for the $15 minimum wage in 2011, 12, you know, it's not that long ago, but it's important to remember that people thought we had lost our minds when we proposed that. And in particular, people who claim to be experts in economics. And we heard from all quarters when we decided that we should try to do that it would kill jobs. And when we debuted this idea and when I started to write about it, the newspapers and magazines filled up with criticisms of this idea, claiming that if we did it, it would harm the very people we intended to help and kill jobs and so on and so forth. You may recall some of that. And in the meantime, we, or certainly I, was very confident that that was not true, because I'd looked at all the empirical evidence, and there's no evidence that when you raise wages for workers, you have fewer jobs. And the longer we tried to do this and the more we showed people that there was no evidence for this, the less they appeared to care. And what was super interesting to me in the beginning of this whole process, Andrew, was, you could slide any kind of study across the table to our opponents about how it wasn't true that when you raised wages, it killed jobs, and it would not in any way.
You didn't convince a single one.
No, not one of them stopped saying if you raise wages, it killed jobs. And it took a little while for me, being, I suppose, naive and a little dense, to realize that they weren't saying those things because they were true. They were saying raising wages kills jobs because it was the most effective thing they'd ever found to keep wages low and profits high. In other words, the narrative had nothing to do with truth. It was just super effective in defending the status quo and maintaining an economic arrangement that benefited people at the top and didn't benefit anybody else. And I wrote a long piece about this many years ago now called The Threat, Not a Theory, where I explored sort of, in many ways to explain to other people, but also to explain to myself why these narratives are so important. And it just became clearer and clearer that phrase, raising wages kills jobs, sounds like a claim on economic cause and effect. What it really is an intimidation tactic masquerading as economics. It's basically the oldest trick in the capitalist's playbook. You ask for a raise, I threaten to fire you. Works like a charm, and has since the beginning of capitalism. And but we fought through that. But that was a super big lesson for me. And in the interim, I bumped into this guy, another a guy who had spent his career working on these sort of economic issues, who had been so frustrated by this kind of thing that he took a sabbatical and created a database of thousands of quotes in history like this. My co-author, Donald Cohen, because what he showed, and what became clearer and clearer as you looked at this stuff, that in any domain where there is concentrated power and wealth, any effort to address an issue will encounter this kind of narrative, this pushback. And the pushback always takes the same form. And this is the point of the book, this corporate bullshit book, is that it's always pro-social language.
I'm on your side, but what you're going to do is actually going to hurt the people you're trying to help.
Yes, exactly. No, I'm totally in agreement with you, but why would you? That's not practical to raise the minimum wage. That would hurt them because then we'd have to fire them, right? It's not practical to address climate change because then we'd all be poor. It's not practical to give women the right to vote because then the poor things wouldn't be able to, lead their lovely lives. It's not practical to let the slaves go free because we treat them better than they would be treated. Like it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And so I had this, I was really frustrated by this. And I've said before, I have a friend who does psychological research. She's one of the world's leading neuroscientists and researchers. Her name is Molly Crockett. And I called her up about this because I was really fascinated by this phenomenon. And she's like, "Oh, Nick, this is so simple. Why this is always the case." And that is because the most important element of human moral reasoning is intention. What you intend to do is how people judge you, which is why if you deliberately murder somebody, you go to jail or worse. But if you're driving your car down the freeway and somebody hucks themselves off an overpass and hits your car, you're clearly not liable for that, right? You will not be charged with a crime, even though the people, to be clear, are both dead. They're equally dead. And that structure, that way of using narrative to deflect change is at the core of how powerful interests protect those interests. And so Don had this fantastic database of these things, and he kind of
the quotes are really jarring and funny.
They're just amazing.
Every point in American history.
Yeah. I mean, go back a couple of hundred years, right? And he sort of gifted this to us, and we sat on it for a couple of years because we didn't really know what to do with it. We thought it was really important, and then we had this idea: we got to turn this into a coffee table book, right? We got to get this out to people because the thing is that that's right. There it is in all its glory.
From all throughout American history, where you're
that's
like,
right.
Oh wow, and you do see a pattern.
Yeah, no. And the thing is that the thing that's so important to realize is that every time somebody makes one of these claims in a new way, it's always plausible. Like it's plausible that social media isn't harming young girls.
I know, and I definitely wanted to talk about social media because I think that is the contemporary version. But quick question. So you're sitting across the table, someone's like, "Hey, raising minimum wage can destroy jobs." And we're like, "Well, here's studies that say it don't." And then the person is unpersuaded, unconvinced. Is it just like obstinacy? Is it that they're actually compensated by an interest group that wants to protect the status quo? Is it just I don't care what the reality is? Like I'm like a tribalist.
I think to be fair to people, it's a little of all those things, and it depends on who you're talking to. So just to be clear, with respect to for example, with respect to the $15 minimum wage or the minimum wage more generally, there were a huge number of well-meaning folks on the left who believed that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour would be an economic catastrophe. And that's because those people went to college and took Econ 101 courses. And if you take an Econ 101 course today, you're going to learn that there's an inverse relationship between the amount that you pay somebody and how many jobs there are, even though that's not true, because that's sort of a primitive way of understanding economics that they teach people. And so even Democratic senators who theoretically should be on the right side of an issue like this were like, no, this is crazy. And so there are at least three camps. There are the people who are often genuinely confused about the issues. There are people whose interests are so aligned with keeping things the same that they simply cannot bring themselves to believe that it would be true that, for example, raising wages didn't kill jobs, right? Like, so I think this is a really interesting thing about human psychology, is that everybody has to be the hero of their own story, right? Everyone wants to feel like they're being moral. And so if you run a big exploitive service company, what you desperately want to believe is that paying people $7.25 an hour or $2.13 plus tips is righteous and moral and is the right thing to do. And when somebody comes along and says, no, that's a terrible thing to do to people, that you should pay them much, much more, those folks generally will desperately seek to find a reason why your claim is not true. And nothing is more convenient than the idea that, well, we could help those people, but that would actually harm them more than help them. And so that's the second category of people who simply just can't bring themselves to fit that the cognitive dissonance is too much for them. And then they're the straight mercenaries who don't give a shit, right? They're just like, I don't care whether it kills jobs or it doesn't. I am paid to keep corporate profits high and executive bonuses high, and I'm just going to say whatever I have to say to protect those interests.
Good old category 3.
Yeah. Good old category 3. But I honestly think that if all we had to fight against were the people in category 3, Andrew, I think we'd make much more progress faster. The mercenaries actually are few and far between. I think it's the people who are confused and the true believers who are the real obstacles to change. The people who simply cannot bring themselves to believe that the way in which the society is organized that benefits them so much is unjust. Right? Dude, you live in New York, surrounded by guys in finance who make obscene amounts of money doing nothing. Right? To be fair, they create zero value in the world. But try that at a dinner party in New York. Yeah.
This podcast is sponsored by Helix Sleep. It's a pretty short list of things you can do that are going to make you happier, healthier, more energetic, more productive every single day. You know what's on that list? Getting the right freaking mattress. And what's the right mattress for you? If you go to Helix Sleep, you take their personalized sleep quiz and they will send you one of 20 unique mattresses made for you and you alone. Well, not you and you alone, like 5% of people. Do the math. For a 100-night free trial, you can sleep on this thing for 3 months. It will keep you cool. Don't just take my word for it. My kids seek out
this mattress in the house. It's the #1 rated mattress picked by GQ and Wired magazine. This mattress will actually make you happier, healthier, and more productive. Helix is offering 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/yang. This is their best offer yet, and it won't last long. With Helix, better sleep starts now.
No, I literally wrote a book called Smart People Should Build Things, Nick. So, I mean, so people generally know where I am on this stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's one quote that speaks to the problem, which is Upton Sinclair's famous, "It's hard to convince a man of something when his understanding it, means he doesn't have a job."
Yes.
I mean,
that's it. Like there's a huge amount of that. And, the other really interesting thing is that any fight for justice means rearranging status, privileges, and power, right? And people, the most important thing to most wealthy people is their status, their privileges, and their power. That's one of the things that, people who end up at the tippy top of these things mostly wind up there because they're pathologically ambitious and status conscious.
Yeah. Again, man, it's one reason I like you is that, you're obviously at the tippy top, but you don't make too much of it, and you're channeling your energies and efforts and resources to try and do positive things.
Yeah. I turn out to be pathologically ambitious too. I'm just trying to channel it in a slightly less harmful way.
No, it's very productive, Nick, and anyone can check out the work that you're doing. So I do want to run through. There's another famous quote that your book reminded me of, which is the first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win.
Yes.
So then for you guys, you have these 6 counter arguments that they brandish anytime you try and do something. And I'm just going to read these in order because they're going to make people laugh, but they're going to feel familiar. So number 1 is it's not actually a problem.
Right. Denial. Yeah.
Yeah. Number 2 is, so it's like, people are fine making whatever the heck amount of money. Number 2 is the free market knows best.
Yes.
Number 3 is it's not our fault. It's your fault or their fault.
Yeah.
Number 4 is what we were just talking about, is it's a job killer.
Yes.
Number 5 is you'll only make it worse, which is tied in there. It's like, hey, you're going to actually hurt the people trying to help. And the number 6 is one I've heard an awful lot. Yeah. It's socialism.
Yes.
Anything that does anything in the direction of people or workers is socialism.
Yeah. Anything which in any way restricts the power of the powerful is socialism by definition. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. And there are all sorts of ways that we could have organized this, but those are sort of the categories that leapt out at us. And I think
I like that order because it seemed kind of sequential to me. Is the number 1 is like, this isn't really a problem, and then after that doesn't work.
Then you start it is a problem, but it's your problem, and then it's like, well, we could solve the problem, but then we'd have to fire you, and then it just keeps going and going and going. But I think what's the real reason we wrote the book. And we should just say to people who are listening to this podcast that this is not a heavy lift, like some of the things that people are exposed to around political economy. This is a picture book, right?
Yeah, I'm going to try and show some pictures. Yeah, on the video.
This is like this is something to be looked at, from time to time, and
it's like quotes from different eras.
That's right. It's not a grind to get through, but what seemed so important to us is to give people the historical context.
Some cartoons for people who like
That's
cartoons.
Right.
Look at that.
All the old cartoons, all that
cartoons.
Kind of stuff. Right. You can't buy this on Kindle, by the way. It just would not work. You have to actually get the physical copy. And the thing is that, in the absence of historical context, lots of these quotes seem plausible. But what teaches you about the patterns is seeing the pattern, right? When you realize that people have been saying this stuff in the same way for generations, right? You're just like, oh my God, like they said that about everything. They said that about lead paint. They said that about what is it? Thalaminide,
child labor,
child labor, slavery. You pick the most egregious, awful practice. There was a guy who was standing up to defend that, saying these things, right?
Tobacco, whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever it was. No, smoking is good for you.
It's not a problem.
It's not a problem.
People can make their own choices.
That's right. If it's not our problem, it's your problem. That's right.
Okay, you go through all these.
All of it. It's just, and what we felt was so useful for the good of the order is that by sharing the history of these quotes with people, it effectively inoculates your brain against them in the future. So once you've seen the patterns, you can't unsee the patterns, right? You're just like, oh my God. Like you turn on the TV and you see one of these clowns spouting one of these things and you're like, oh, that's the same bullshit that they said about the last thing. It's just obviously not true.
One fun thing, Nick, is that so one issue you raise in the book, which I was happy about, is social media. And you just referenced something saying, hey, you think it's probably bad for girls' mental health, which I totally agree with, by the way. Yeah. And one of the interesting things is that if you try and apply these arguments to social media, some of them don't work at all. Like, so it's not a problem that works. They're like, is there a problem? Then free market knows best is, well, like let people figure it out. But then you think, does that make any sense?
Well, no,
it's not our fault. It's your fault. But then it's a job killer thing makes zero sense.
Yeah.
Because the social media, it's like no one, not that many people work at these companies. You'll only make it worse. It is also hard to, when you look at this, you think, wow, like social media really ought to be teed up nicely for this because some of these counter arguments don't even apply.
Yeah, but I mean, they're vigorously making the argument that it's not a problem. There isn't a problem, or B, that if there is a problem, it's on you parents to control this. Right? It's not our fault. It's your fault. And C, the free market will fix it. Here's their version. Oh, we can regulate ourselves. Well, why would we do something that would harm our users? Right? Trust us. We don't need any stinking regulation, right? I mean, it all recycles in very, very similar ways. And one of the questions that I've been asked about the book many times is, well, where will the future bullshit come from? Like, where will the lies come from in the future? And my answer is any place there's concentrated power and wealth. You show me concentrated power and wealth, I will show you bullshit. Right? Like there's never not an example. It's a fascinating thing. The other thing that always like really struck me, Andrew, in working through all this stuff is like, why is it, like, you just gotta ask this question, like, why is it that the Chamber of Commerce never says the truth about these things, which is, well, of course we don't want to pay you more. We want profits to be as high as possible. And those executive bonuses and insane salaries are how we afford yachts and planes and everything else. And we don't give a crap about you and your family. We just want your wages to be lower. Like what? Like this is obviously the truth.
It wouldn't be very effective. I mean, it would be honest, but it wouldn't be very effective.
No. Well, in all of these issues where this stuff has been litigated, in all of our lives, we have never once seen somebody stand up and say the truth, right? Which is like, well, of course it's poisonous, but it's incredibly profitable for us to sell you that poison.
Sure.
Right?
Addictive poison.
It's addictive poison. Are you crazy? Of course we're going to keep selling it to you. Like, why would we not? Like, we don't give a rip. Like, it's super profitable. We fly around in our own jets and have giant yachts and make lots of money, and you use this product and can't stop and get sick. Well, that's somebody else's problem, right? It's your problem. We don't give a crap. Like in the history of capitalism, no one has ever stood up and said something like that, even though it is clearly true. Why? Because if they did, the intention would be clear and people would be angry. They wouldn't be afraid.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Please do hit like and subscribe and hit that bell if you want to be notified every time a new episode drops. Probably on Mondays, but hit that bell, and thank you. Yeah, the obfuscation works pretty well. You know, you can just muddy the water, and then especially in this information environment, because people will be like, you know, you think that, I think that, I've got to study, you've got to study.
Yeah.
So Nick, when did you have the awakening to be heading in this direction? You're talking about 2011 was the beginning of Fight for 15. Let's say, for argument's sake, you've been at this for like 12 to 15 years, or so, and you put up some major victories. You funded some awesome initiatives. You have advised the Biden administration on middle out economics, trying to make it so that the economy is more fair. I dare say that neither you nor I think corporate bullshit is on like the decline. I mean, it's probably as higher than it's ever been.
Right.
I feel like the concentration of power is higher than it's ever been.
Well, I mean, those feelings are based in fact. It is
sure.
True. Yeah.
and I'm friendly with some of the folks who went into the antitrust division, and they had some, in my opinion, accurate ideas as to what should happen, but then they haven't actually been able to implement or execute meaningfully where some of the big tech companies have been concerned. I think that you know, there hasn't been like the equivalent of like you know, Baby Bell breakup, or even like what happened to Microsoft back in the day. And you know, you probably were somewhere close to the Microsoft thing since. How are you feeling about your fight? Because, and I'm going to put myself in your shoes for a minute. Like, I started a nonprofit in 2011, Venture for America. That led me to run for office. I wrote that book, Smart People Should Build Things, back in 2011. And then, like you know, I've now written like you know, several books, and like and still trying to drive in a direction. How's your one-man gang movement? Not one, because I know you have a team around you and some awesome people that I know. But like, so, are you feeling good and bad? Like, you know, are you like, do you think that we're winning or losing?
So that's a great question. There's good news and there's bad news. Let me start with the bad news. The bad news is that we dug ourselves a hole over the last 50 years that is very, very deep. And the amount of economic inequality and injustice in the United States, for example, that has been created, and not everything has gotten worse, right? But certainly if you look at economic inequality.
Oh, yeah. It like productivity and wages diverged starting about 50 years ago when they went like in totally different directions.
That's right. And so we have built, we dug a hole. It's effectively a $55 trillion hole, which is the aggregate amount of money that has flowed incrementally from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1% over the last 50 years. It's around $2.5 trillion extra that flows from the bottom 90% to the top 1% today per year. And that the problem with that hole is that, you know, inequality is much more than an economic inconvenience for the people who aren't well treated. It shreds the reciprocity norms that make social cohesion and democracy possible. And that's why our politics is so screwed up today, is that it is just an objective fact that for most of the people in the country, certainly the bottom 80 or 90%, they have been exploited in a really pretty terrible way for the last 30 or 40 years. And many of them have lost faith in democracy and government for reasonable reasons, right? Like that it's just a fact that if you were a median,
if you think you've been screwed,
you're probably
right.
You are correct. You have been screwed. And if you're angry at government for letting that happen, you have an absolute right to feel that way. You are correct. You got totally screwed. And the government of the United States of America aided and abetted that for better or worse. It is just a fact. And people are pissed, and people on the left are pissed, and people on the right are pissed. And it is an open question whether our democracy will survive this self-inflicted wound. That's the bad news. The good news is that when I started on this journey in 2006, 7, 8, which is when I first started coming to terms with inequality, people didn't even recognize it was a problem. If you even raised it in polite company, people got angry. When I first started talking about raising the minimum wage, even the people on the left thought I had lost my mind. So, Andrew, here's the thing. There are 9,500 professional economists in the United States, something like that. When we debuted the $15 minimum wage, not one wrote in support. Not one came to our rescue. Not one published a big article in the New York Times saying this is absolutely the right thing to do. All this bullshit about it killing jobs is not true. It's just a scare tactic. This is the right thing to do. Andrew, when I came up with that idea, even the left-leaning economists who populate the sort of left infrastructure of activists thought we had lost our minds, right? Okay, if you fast forward to today, the economic, look, Barack Obama was president for 8 years. Inequality rose under Barack Obama. It didn't decline. Yep. Why? Because he was surrounded by economists who were neoliberals. He was trapped in that neoliberal paradigm. And so here's the good news, is that consensus has almost entirely changed today. That everywhere you look, people are recognizing how badly neoliberalism has harmed the society, or market fundamentalism, trickle-down economics, whatever you want to call it. Every university is standing up efforts to rethink capitalism. I mean, everywhere you go, there's another seminar or whatever it is on reimagining the economy, rethinking capitalism. The president of the United States went to the picket lines for the UAW workers, right? Unprecedented in American history. And so the good news is that 10 years ago, even the people who should have been fighting for the right stuff were paralyzed. And today they're all engaged in the fight. Like, look, why is the Biden administration the most transformational administration on economic policy since Roosevelt? Because they're the first administration since Reagan to break with neoliberal orthodoxy, right? That's a clean break. They just said, we don't buy this bullshit anymore. We're going to actually improve people's lives. All this nonsense about job killing it's just nonsense. It's just a red herring. And so that's the good news, is that we are in a moment of transformation. A lot of people, the economic and political consensus is rapidly changing, and there is real hope for real change. And it may be too late. It may be too late, which would be terrible and sad and awful for you and me and a lot of other people. But so that's my view, is that there's some bad news and some good news.
Happy holidays. You know what's tough to do during holiday season? Eat right and not gain weight and not, frankly, get a little extra tummy going because you don't have time, you're on the go. The way you can make it so you stay healthy and charged up in the right way is to use Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service. Chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. This is the service that's going to change your life. I love their shredded chicken taco bowl as just one example. It's not just for dinner. And one thing that's great about it is that it's totally commitment free. It's not one of those things that's tricky. You can turn it on, you can turn it off, but you are not going to want to turn it off because it's going to change your life for the better. This December, you can get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Just choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered straight to your door, ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Great for, frankly, the guys who aren't going to be cooking for themselves so well. So head to factormeals.com/yang50 and use code YANG50 to get 50% off. That's code YANG50 at factormeals.com/YANG50 to get 50% off. Try Factor today.
I agree with both of those takes. One thing that happened when I was running for president, Nick, is I'd say to folks, is like, if you let things get out of balance for 30, 40 years, the rebalancing actually is going to seem very dramatic.
It is. No, for sure.
So
for sure.
And then my proposals to rebalance it were, obviously to start giving everyone money.
Yeah.
My favorite thing of the last several years in American policy was the enhanced child tax credit that lifted millions of kids out of poverty. And then because our political system is so limited and dysfunctional now, we put them all back into poverty, like 15 months later. I mean, it was unconscionable. At least on that one, a bunch of economists came out and said, yeah, we should totally keep doing this. But,
no, for sure. And there's And I'm not a UBI enthusiast in the way that you are, but clearly there is a huge amount of new empirical evidence supporting your view that when you just give people money, it turns out to be great for them and great for the economy overall, right? I mean, the American Rescue Plan being, a great example of that, right?
Dude, I'm an evidence guy just like you are. And one of the things I will cop to is that when people say, hey, were you for lifting the minimum wage? And then I had to do this tortuous. It's like, well, I prefer just giving the money, but if you take that off the table, then I'm totally for raising the minimum wage.
Yeah.
which is where I've been. But, people obviously, it's hard to have both those thoughts in your head. I'm with you on the depth of the problem. I'm with you on the shifting in thinking about it, because you're right. Now everyone sees inequality as an issue, and then they're happy to try and consider addressing it. I'm heartened by the enhanced child tax credit. The stuff that scares the shit out of me is that we had a long extended period of abundance that some folks think is ending. We've had this golden goose in the form of the dollar as the global reserve currency. And then people are looking up saying, wow, we owe 33 trillion, now interest rates are higher. There are all these issues. I'm still of the mind that we must try and dig out of this hole that you described. Your 55 trillion is a fascinating number. For people's reference, the size of the US economy is around 25 trillion. Mm-hmm. So Nick saying that essentially 2 years of economy has gotten transferred to the hands of the top 1 or 10%. It's a Herculean challenge for us to make use of institutions that people are losing faith in literally day by day, and then try and reverse some of what's happened over the last 50 years.
Yeah, no, and it's particularly hard when you have one of the political parties, which effectively is a nihilist organization that doesn't want government to be functioning, right? People are frustrated. I know people in the administration are super frustrated by the disconnect between the achievements, the legislative achievements of the Biden administration, and how people are feeling about the economy. And I'm frustrated by it, but not surprised, because for 95% of Americans, the economy does not exist as an abstraction. They don't read the New York Times. It is my job and the expenses. And the facts are that we lived through this once in 100-year global supply chain disruption of the pandemic, which pushed prices up substantially, and wages are rising. But for a lot of people, stuff just got a lot more expensive and a lot harder. Sure. And yes, the IRA is going to bring jillions of new jobs and technology and all sorts of great things and chips and the infrastructure plan. All of that's to the good. But for the 95% of Americans who already have a job, right, they're not going to directly benefit or viscerally benefit from a lot of these programs directly. And if they do, it's not going to be for a couple of 3 years even then. Sure. And in the meantime, if you hadn't had Kyrsten Sinema and that Manchin clown from Virginia, Manchin, we could have raised the minimum wage, which would really help people. We could have gone farther with overtime. We could have done a bunch of things that would have affected people right now in a substantial way, and that would have made a big difference. But of course,
enhanced child tax credit among those things.
Yeah, 100%. Right.
Totally.
Exactly. There were all these things that you could have done. Obviously, the Supreme Court struck down the student debt reduction. Yeah. Right. These are all things that would have really helped people, and I think made a huge difference. On the deficit, I think what's important for folks to realize is that America's deficits were not caused by profligate spending on middle class programs. It was caused by, first and foremost, wage suppression. Right. So if the median full-time worker in America today had simply maintained their same share of GDP in 1975 instead of earning about $50,000 a year, they'd earn about $100,000 a year. So if we had an economy where the median full-time worker earned 100, not 50, we would have zero budget deficits. Zero. Because the tax revenue that would have been created by all of that extra revenue, all of that extra income would have paid all this stuff down. But the real culprits, of course, were giant tax cuts for the rich and a couple of three incredibly stupid wars, right?
Yeah. And that's one thing I like about you too, Nick, is that you're very open, being like, look, tax me more. It's cool. It would have been fine.
It would have been fine. It would have been fine. And taxes on rich people are slightly higher than they were. But boy, you think about where it was in the early 2000s, like cap gain tax rates at 15%, like super wealthy people earning millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars a year and having a total tax burden of, 12% or 15% or whatever it is nuts.
Yeah. Nuts. One of the most dangerous things about the economy today is that people see it through partisan lenses.
Yeah.
Where if you're a Republican, you just feel better about the economy when a Republican's in charge. If you're and by the way, the Republican partisan lens effect is stronger than the Democratic partisan lens effect, which is, so here's my solution. By the way, this will get us out of this mess, Nick. I hope you like it.
Okay. I'm listening.
What we do is, regardless of who wins this next election, we take the loser and put them in a replica of the White House, and then let everyone who supported that person just tune into that channel. They'll feel good about the economy. The other side will feel good about the economy. Everyone will feel good about the economy. And then just tune into the president you want, and we're golden.
I thought you were going to say, put the loser in a terrarium full of fire ants.
No, and then just give them a $400,000 TV contract a year. Get some extras in there.
There you go.
People can visit it. It's fine.
There you go. There you go.
So that is one of the dangers, is that you would think, hey, if I come through for the economy, then voters will see it and I'll be rewarded. But now the economy is almost feelings.
Yeah. Well, and there's
different people heading in different
definitely. Yeah, there are definitely a bunch of people in the country that are so partisan that no fact pattern will change their minds. None.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But if 10% of people who ordinarily vote Republican are available, persuadable, that's transformational, right? So there's a third of the country that you simply are never gonna reach. It's just impossible. But there is there are a third of the country on the left that probably is unreachable in the same way. But there's a nice third in the middle who I think are open-minded enough to be persuaded by facts and to be persuaded by what they see in evidence and in actual differences. And I think that that's why delivering for people, actually doing things that will benefit, it's the only way out.
It's the only way out. We have to deliver for people because there's nothing else you can do.
There is no alternative. There is no alternative. There's no alternative.
This podcast is sponsored by ExpressVPN. Going online without ExpressVPN is like changing while leaving your window wide open. Gross! You might not have anything to hide, but why give random creeps a chance to invade your privacy? That's why I use ExpressVPN. It's super easy. You hit a button and then you just beam in. Best of all, no one can see what you're doing. No big tech companies, no ad companies, no other companies. Why use ExpressVPN? When you go online, it is just you and you're surfing. No one can see it. It's the way to go because a bunch of big companies say, hey, all of you high-end consultants and spies, use ExpressVPN. Secure your online activity by visiting expressvpn.com/yang today. That's expressvpn.com/yang, and you can get an extra 3 months free. expressvpn.com/yang.
So this book is part of your portfolio of activities, this useful bit of inoculation, very positive. What else are you working on right now that we can be excited about?
Well, we just pushed through an increase in the overtime threshold through the Department of Labor that is now in, it's an executive order that is now being, there was a comment period and now they're going to analyze it. What they should have done, what the administration should have done, is raised it to about $85,000 a year. And if they had done that, that would have brought the overtime threshold back up to the former high water mark. Instead, because they were crybabies, they only raised it to about $58,000 a year, which will still benefit millions and millions of people. So that's a thing that my team was super involved in, and I feel very strongly about. The overtime threshold is to the middle class what the minimum wage is to low wage work. So that's a really cool thing that's happening right now. Another really cool thing that's happening right now that we were deeply involved in is the transformation of how the federal government analyzes and judges the impact of regulation through a regulatory agency called OIRA. And it will not surprise you to learn that the governing structure of that institution was written by the same people who told you that raising wages killed jobs and tax cuts for the rich create growth. Basically, it was a rubric where anything that costs corporations money was bad by definition, and anything that was good for people would be like, well, very hard to calculate. And so we probably shouldn't look at that. And so this new way of understanding how we should regulate will be much friendlier and constructive with respect to the benefits it generates for the broad population. And that's another thing that is very, very exciting. And then, more abstractly, I and my friend Eric Beinarker have been trying to finish a book on economics for years now. We're getting very, very close. But, I think that at the core of the problem in the United States and around the world is a profoundly broken way of understanding economic cause and effect that you can call neoclassical or orthodox or whatever you want. But understanding GDP is an adequate measure of growth. Understanding,
love it. Let's change that, man.
Yeah. Understanding markets as efficient, they're not. Understanding people as reliably selfish and rational, we aren't. All of that stuff. Understand the economy as an equilibrium system that's Pareto optimal. All of these things are plausible but not true. But more importantly, they are massively biased towards the status quo. That belief system makes it such that if you enact policy on the basis of it, only one thing can happen.
You are founding a new school of economics. What the hell is it called?
It's going to be called Market Humanism.
Dude, I love market humanism. Holy crap.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. Yeah. So, obviously this is a comically ambitious endeavor, but but we think that we're basically on the right track and that you can't really fix these problems if you use the old constructs and structures and ideas, right?
I use the same example. I said, hey, you know what's going to be great for GDP? AI. like how's that going to work out for the average American worker there?
Right. Yeah. Well, you know what's great for GDP? Cancer. Right? Like It's just it's a terrible, terrible way of understanding whether we're getting, whether we're, improving.
Market humanism. I love it. Dude, I actually called something similar. I called it human-centered capitalism.
Yeah.
Market humanism might be better as a name, but I'm pretty sure the ideas are close in that I said, look, we should be measuring the economy by how people are doing, outcomes, health.
Outcomes, outcomes, not outputs. Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. And look, you and I are on the same page, of course. And again, coming back to the good news that we talked about earlier, there's an emerging consensus around these sets of ideas that people, people recognize that we went off the tracks and that we got to get I'm mixing my metaphors now, but we got to point the country in a different, or point the world actually in a different and better direction. And there'll be a lot of different ways in which we talk about that and address that, but they're all generally headed in the right direction, which is trying to get the economy to serve people rather than people serving the economy, which is what we have.
Human-centered economy, man.
Yeah. That's what it's all about. So.
Wow, anyway, man. Well, I can't wait to have you back on to talk that book. When do you think you guys are gonna? I mean, not to say. I mean, this book is an achievement, but like,
No, the other one's going to be much more interesting. I mean, we basically have a manuscript now. We're in the editing phase. So
what? That means it's on its way, man. Because you've done the hard work.
Well, it's a lot of work, and it's risky. That the problem is that the world of economics is very, very. How should I put it? They're very
institutionalized.
Yes, and they're very touchy about criticism. What's so interesting is that every time you talk to economists about these problems, like 100% of them are like, "Oh, well, we don't believe that." Like all that old. I don't know who believes that old stuff, and you're like, "Well, somebody believes it." It got put it like, and the poetry department didn't come up with this cockamamie stuff.
You can just bust out whatever the micro and macro textbooks.
Exactly. Like they are teaching this at Harvard, right? Totally. Like, like, I don't know, like maybe you didn't believe it, but like it is the consensus. It is what you taught.
I can vouch for the fact that that's what you learned. So
yeah, so
like there's that.
Yeah, good for you for not wanting to be attached to it, but like somebody's fault. The chemistry department didn't do this. Physics department didn't do this.
I love it, man. Market humanism is what we need. If people want to keep up with your work, how can they best do so?
Oh golly, I used to say follow me on Twitter, but that thing is such a hellhole today that I never I don't go very much. But just check out our website, Civic Ventures.
CivicVentures.com.
Civic Ventures, yeah.
Well, Nick, congratulations. Corporate bullshit, exposing the lies and half-truths that protect profit, power, and wealth in America. Godspeed to you and your work. And let's try and build this market humanist, human-centered economy together, my friend.
I love it. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It was super fun to talk to you as always.